You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
Become a 3CR subscriber today. Go to 3cr.org.au/subscribe or call the station on 03 9419 8377. Be a part of your community radio station.
That plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction, in the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning, death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed mind.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia on the National Community Radio Satellite. Listen to the Anarchist World This Week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. Listen to analysis of local, national, international events. Listen to analysis you'll never hear anywhere else.
Here we are, Anarchist World This Week. One or two technical issues which we've overcome. The sacred cows tripped over the cord. And I had to find where it was plugged in, but that's all been sorted out. And if you wonder what anarchy is all about, anarchos without rulers. It's all about power and wealth. What gives rulers the ability to determine the lives of billions of people around the globe? Inequalities in power and wealth. So what's the anarchist struggle? The anarchist struggle is to devolve power, share power, possibly through direct democratic means, and hold wealth in common and use it for the common good. That's what anarchy is all about. It's a very simple concept, nothing complex about it. Now, I'd like to welcome all our listeners across the country, courtesy of the Community Radio Network. My name's Joseph Toscano. This program is coming to you from the studios of 3CR in Melbourne. The program is podcast. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au. Now, it's amazing how things change in a few days. Now, a few days ago, the big news was the Dunkley by-election, which is an area of Melbourne, outer suburb, which includes places like Frankston, Carrum Downs, Mount Martha, Mount Eliza, and the list goes on and on. And the Liberal Party was very, very keen, with assistance from the Libertarian Party and the Advance Australia Party, to claim that seat. Now, I've got a problem. The Labor Party did win the election. They did have a little bit of a swing against them, but I've got a big problem which I'd like to share with you. Remember how Barnaby Joyce used to be Gina Rinehart's political toy boy? Well, I'm going to tell you a true story which you may find very hard to believe. Now, while the Liberal Party faithful were running around Dunkley trying to get people to change their vote, Mr. Peter Dutton arrives in Dunkley, does a bit of campaigning, jumps on a jet, goes from Melbourne to Perth on the red-eyed special, business class obviously, and attends a birthday party for 40 minutes. Guess what? He attends Gina Rinehart's 70th birthday party. Now, Gina's a little bit like me. No, not in terms of the amount of wealth we have, but in terms of the fact that she doesn't like Zoom, all right, and video conference. When she wants her political toy boys, she wants to see them face to face. So Peter Dutton, as the leader of the opposition, had a big issue to face. Did he stay in Dunkley and continue campaigning, trying to get those last few percentages, which would have given the Liberal Party the seat? Or did he jump on a plane from Melbourne, business class, which he paid for himself, I understand, fly to Perth, go to Gina's Knees Up Mother Brown's 70th birthday party, stay there for 40 minutes, rush back to the airport, catch a plane back to Melbourne, then take a ride to Dunkley to continue campaigning. So what did he do? What did Peter do? Well, Peter understands. He understands where power lies in this country. He understands that if you do not have the ear of the rich and powerful, there is no way you are going to be elected. No way. So obviously he made what he considered to be the important decision. He decided to desert his campaign workers in Dunkley for a day or so and mosey along to Perth to help Gina blow out her 70 candles on her cake. I understand, Peter. It's all right. We used to have Murdoch in the past, and we had people like Mr. Rudd go down. They used to fly to the USA to pay homage to Murdoch before they went into their campaigns. But I think this really highlights where power lies. Power in a democratic society or a parliamentary democracy, let's not use the word democratic, rule of the people, by the people, for the people, by an engaged public. Let's not use that word. It's overused. But in a parliamentary democracy, power lies in the boardrooms of national and transnational corporations. Nothing highlights this more than Peter Dutton's escapade during the Dunkley by-election campaign during the final days to pay homage to Gina Rhinehart. Nothing highlights this more than that. But it's not just Peter Dutton who does this. This happens constantly. Whether it's the Pratts of the world, whether it's the Foxes of the world, whether it's the Stokes of the world, and I could go on and on. But this happens constantly. And this highlights the bankruptcy of a political system which supposedly is based on participation through voting by an electorate every 3 to 4 years to give, your representatives power to make decisions for you for that particular period of time. This highlights that bankruptcy. But more importantly, it highlights how difficult it is to make any major change that affects the profitability of these major corporations and individuals unless you can create a mass movement. And that's the dilemma in Australian politics today. It's all issue-orientated. It's about this issue or that issue. It's about, identity politics. It's about issue politics. There is very few people speaking about the growing inequalities in our society. Obviously, it's much easier to be involved in an issue-orientated campaign or identity politics, much, much easier than it is to be involved in struggle which challenges those who exercise power and hold wealth. And I'd like to thank Mr. Dutton. That's right. I'd like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for pointing out to the Australian people who makes decisions in our society and how important it is for politicians, political figures, even opposition leaders and prime ministers to, cosy up to these people. Last week, we saw our Prime Minister, Mr. Albanese, cosy up to the Pratt family in Melbourne. And last week, we saw Mr. Dutton cosy up with one of the most powerful and richest people in this society, Gina Rhinehart. We saw Mr. Dutton cosy up to her. So it's a wonderful world we live in, isn't it? And as we said at the beginning of the program, it's about power and wealth. It's about inequalities in power and wealth. And the anarchist struggle, as I keep saying over and over again, is the struggle to devolve power, that's shared power, it's the struggle to hold wealth in common and use it for the common good. Because for every extra dollar that the Gina Rineharts of the world are able to put in their pockets or in their virtual bank accounts, That's one less dollar. That's right, one less dollar for people who can't even afford the basic necessities. And the tragedy in this country is that so few people are willing to talk about the bigger picture. Most people understand the bigger picture, but they're quite concerned that if you talk about the bigger picture and you make moves for major reform or even minor reform, the chances of you being elected to Parliament are minuscule. And that's the lesson we should learn about Dunkley. And that's why it's so important that people get involved in activities around the country, not just issue-orientated activities, not just identity politics, but but activity which goes to the very heart of the problems we have in this country today, where 1/3 of the population on social security benefits lives a hand-to-mouth existence, where the fastest growing sector of the workforce are the working poor, where people who can't earn enough at the end of the week to pay for their basic necessities. And in a period of housing stress, I like that word, housing stress, let's say housing disaster, where people are paying more and more of their income to keep a roof over their head, whether it's a mortgage or rent, we begin to understand how significant the issues are in this country. And unless we tackle those inequalities in power and wealth, we will continue to be faced with the same issues. You're listening to The Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network, ASEAN. Well, just in case you didn't know, there is a little conference going on in Melbourne, and it's the ASEAN conference. So what does ASEAN stand for? ASEAN is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. That's why it's ASEAN. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and I think it was created in the early 1970s. Now, just in case you think that Australia is a member of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, I'm sorry, we're not. We're strategic partners. I think it was the 1980s we became strategic partners of ASEAN. But this year, the conference is being held in Melbourne. Now, who are the 10 nation states? What do they represent? Who are they? Well, you've got Brunei, which is ruled by a sultan. You've got Cambodia, which is a little bit like North Korea. It's almost a hereditary monarch masquerading as a democracy. You have Indonesia. We've just seen the election of a man who had a dishonourable discharge from the Indonesian military forces, Mr. Subianto, because of his activities, especially in East Timor-Leste and West Papua. You have Laos, which is still a communist country. You have Malaysia. You have Myanmar, which was not invited to this year's conference because of the civil war which is raging in Myanmar, which is a military dictatorship. You've got the Philippines, who've just elected recently the son of the hated dictator, Mr. Marcos. You've got Singapore, the city-state of Singapore. Thailand, which is going through its own political machinations, as the major political force is being, ostracised and marginalised by the people who exercise power in Thailand. And then you've got Vietnam, which is another communist country. So they're the countries. Now, why are they important? Why is ASEAN important? Well, ASEAN in total has about 650 million people. That's about 9% of the world's population. It's got a gross domestic product of about 3 trillion, which isn't huge these days. So that's ASEAN. So what's the big debating point? Well, the big debating point is the rise of China, the South China Seas, and most importantly of all, economic development, which is all about privatisation, because many of these countries actually still have publicly owned assets. And it's interesting to see the new Indonesian president-elect, the president-elect, was talking about privatising what's left of the public sector in Indonesia, which is quite significant in comparison to Australia. So we see ASEAN as a potential market, in inverted commas, in terms of allowing Australian investors, Australian super funds, Australian corporations to go out there and make a buck. Fascinating. And as far as the China situation is concerned, now many of the countries in ASEAN are really sick and tired of the Chinese, anti-Chinese rhetoric that's around this part of the country. Now the dilemma is, the way we're going, and again, I have to agree with Mr. Paul Keating, as much as it pains me, the fact is that we are the 51st state of the United States. It's that simple. Maybe we'll soon get voting rights and we can decide between Biden and Trump in November. Because think of the situation we find ourselves in. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which are our immediate neighbours, not South Korea, not Japan, but Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam. They're our immediate neighbours. We are not considered to be part of this association. So we find ourselves in a situation where we're trying to peddle US policies regarding Taiwan and the South China Seas to these particular leaders who are, many of them are not particularly interested. Because the reality is, irrespective of what you think of the Chinese Communist Party, and I've always felt they're a bunch of bastards, right? Centralised authoritarian nation, irrespective of what you think about them, they are a reality. A total reality that we all have to deal with and face at some stage. So isn't it about time we had some type of balanced reporting about what's happening in the ASEAN conference? Because it's all about trade, it's all about what Singapore wants to do, and it's as if the other nation states don't exist in this little equation. So, welcome to Australia, ASEAN delegates. Hopefully you won't be too tarnished by your experience. I call the Association of Southeast Asian Nations the 9% Club. And why is it the 9% Club? Because they're responsible for 9% of the world's population, which, considering we have 26 million people in this country and they have around 650 million, and above them is another little nation state for around 1.2 billion people, I think it's about time that we stopped thinking that all the way with the USA is the only defence economic policy that we should be pursuing. Because when you add up the figures, it's not a pretty picture. You listen to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. This program is streaming live on 3cr.org.au. The program is podcast. Now, I mean, what's happening in Gaza is beyond beyond imagination. This is nothing more than collective punishment. The Palestinians living in Gaza are now being punished as a group, that's 2.3 million people, because of what their government did. Now, if I'd be in jail today, if I went out there and I treated a group of rats, that's right, a group of rats, like the Israeli government is treating Gazans, I would be arrested and be, a monster. Think about it. Over 30,000 dead. And I'm not belittling the 1,200 Israelis that were killed. But the fact is, of those 30,000 dead, over 12,000 are children. We're now talking about mass starvation. We are talking about the bombing of health facilities, including hospitals, including maternity hospitals. We are talking about the almost carpet bombing of an area about 1/3 the size of Melbourne. Fish in a barrel. That's what the Palestinians living in Gaza are. Fish in a barrel. And what does the rest of the world do? We sit on our fingers. Even the President of the United States of America is beginning to understand that his political fortunes in terms of whether he can defeat Mr. Trump or not in November hinge around a Gazan ceasefire. Now, if he really wants to talk tough, it's one thing airlifting a little bit of food into Gaza. It's another thing of actually telling the Israeli government that if they don't agree to a ceasefire, they will cease all military assistance tomorrow. At the same time, wouldn't it be nice if the Australian government recalled the Australian ambassador from Israel because of what's happening in Gaza? I mean, it's a little bit like this. If somebody, comes into my house and has got a baseball bat and starts bashing me around, and I pull out a machine gun and shoot him to pieces, well, I'll be facing charges. There are appropriate responses. And what's happened with the Israeli military, they were so pissed off about the fact that they weren't able to protect their citizens because the world's greatest security agency didn't even know there was going to be a breakout from the world's biggest prison in Gaza on the 7th of October, that they now are involved in activities which, as I said before, if I got a group of rats, all right, so I got 20 rats, I took them outside the studio, middle of the street, and started doing to the rats what the Israeli military forces are doing in Gaza, I would be locked away. So when is a war crime not a war crime? When do we say to a so-called ally, enough is enough? Because ultimately, what the Israeli military and the Israeli government, the current government, can do, whether it's Lebanon or whether it's Gaza or whether it's Syria, what it can do or can't do, is totally dependent on our support. And it's interesting, with the holy month of Ramadan around the corner, next few days, there is a great possibility that this war could explode into a Middle East disaster zone. Very possible. Because it's not like the good old days where you could round people up and bomb the shit out of them and do what you like. There are cameras everywhere. Cameras everywhere. You know? Why America lost in Vietnam was because the information about what was going on came out. And to me, that pivotal moment last week when Gazans were trying to access this limited amount of food which has been brought in by the Israeli army under a private contractor, were shot or died in the, as they fled, from the gunshots from the Israeli army. To me, it's very, very similar to the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, where public opinion changed overnight regarding what was happening. Think about it. And all those people out there, all those Australians who think the only way that we as a people can survive in Southeast Asia is by having this totally uncritical association with the United States of America. Remember, the United States of America is interested in the United States of America, which I understand. And if it's not in their interests, as we saw in Afghanistan or at Vietnam or Iraq or Somalia, if it's not in their interests to be there, they will leave. And if push comes to shove, if it's not in the United States' interest to protect Australia because of pressure in the homeland, well, they will cut and run. That is the nature of the beast. You listen to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. This program is streaming live on 3cr.org.au. Well. Guess what? I've just been told that Gaza in its breadth is the same distance as Mernda to Flinders Street Station. Now, we all know where Flinders Street Station is in Melbourne, but Mernda would be about 25, maybe 30 kilometres away. It's one of the new outer suburbs in the north east. All right, let's move on. ASIO. It's fascinating, isn't it? What's behind the current head of ASIO telling all and sundry in a media conference, as he does his yearly report about dangers to the Australian society, stating unambiguously that a former politician was working for the other side while he was he or she, we don't know if it's a he or she, was in Parliament. What's the point? Now, there are laws in this country which would see somebody like that, unless they're dead, if the comments by the ASIO chief are true, which you've got to doubt sometimes, to be in jail for the next 20 to 30 years. So what's the whole point of raising the issue, not naming the politician, putting everybody under a cloud who served in the federal parliament in the last 20 to 30 years, putting the integrity under a cloud? What's the point? Well, this is about politics. And when I talk about politics, about putting pressure on the current Australian government to pull its head in. They're very keen. ASIO is very, very, very keen to ensure that elected representatives pull their head in. Stop talking negatively about the Australia-United States alliance. It's about putting pressure on the federal government to increase their budget. Remember last year, the big threat was ultra-white nationalism. This year, it's about some ex-politician who may or may not have been spying for another nation's state. So there is a strategy behind this. And that strategy is to try to keep the hands of the government away from taking a closer look at the way ASIO is interpreting government policy. Now, the last honest man to enter ASIO was Lionel Murphy. In the 1970s, he raided the ASIO offices because ASIO was aiding and abetting Croatian nationalists in their bombing campaign throughout Australia by actually not taking it seriously. Now, ASIO is not some type of independent government entity. It is part of government. It is funded by government. It's supposedly there, like Mossad was, to give us forewarning of any serious threat to this country. But we have the ASIO head carrying on ad nauseum about some former politician who they think was a spy. Now, I'll give you an example. I can, under this country's legislation, be jailed indefinitely if I'm an asylum seeker. Constitutionally, it's okay. The High Court has dictated. I can be jailed up to 25 years for being involved in an occupation. I can be fined $10,000 a day for being involved in a strike outside an enterprise bargaining agreement period. I can be held for 7 days, and I can't tell anybody I've been held for 7 days if the authorities believe I may have information which may assist them in their inquiries regarding a possible, terrorist act. And if I refuse to answer questions, I can be jailed for up to 7 years. And the list goes on and on. The amount of legislation we have in this country which curtails the ability of individuals to actually have any rights is extraordinary. And here's the ASIO chief telling me and you, as if we're some dumb idiots, that a former politician was spying for a foreign power while he or she was in Parliament and there's nothing they can do about it. What a load of bullshit. This is about putting pressure on the government to ensure they don't look into what ASIO is currently doing. It's very simple. It's very simple. Let's move on. This is the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. This program is streaming live on 3cr.org.au. Look, if you want to send SMSs during the program, you're welcome. 0439 395 489. 0439 395 489. If you want to leave a message, please do. I'll contact you in the next day or two when I get a chance. Now, I'd just like to remind you this program is podcast. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au. That's 3cr.org.au. A few YouTube channels you could look at. Public interest before corporate interests. I've got about over 250 presentations now there. You can go to josephtoscano.nam where you can see the presentations I've done on here. Historical events of the past in this country which have a significant impact on Australia today. You can go websites, public interest before corporate interest, pibci.net. You can join any time you like. And the list goes on and on. I mean, it's not about the stuff that's around. It's about you actually having the energy to take it a bit further. And talking about that, let's talk about public housing. Everybody's business. Now, look, I'm the convener of a group called Public Housing Everybody's Business and the co-convener of another group called Defend and Extend Public Housing. And they both have Facebook pages. And every Thursday, if you live in Victoria, in Melbourne, we have a vigil on the steps of the Victorian Parliament House from midday to 1 p.m. Now, this Thursday, which will be the 7th of March. God, I'm a genius. Or is it this? No, it's the 8th of March. Yep. I'm not a genius. It's the 8th of March. Well, this Thursday, whatever it is. Monday was the 5th, Tuesday the 6th, Wednesday was the 7th, Thursday's the 8th of March. The Greens leader in Parliament, the Victorian Parliament, and the Greens have, I think, 3 or 4 members in the lower house and 3 or 4 members in the upper house, will be addressing the vigil regarding their progress regarding making public housing a significant issue in the debate, in the parliamentary debate. And we look forward to hearing from Samantha Rantham regarding their activities, because if there is one group in this country, apart from all the activist groups, one political party, I should say, that has actually continued to promote public housing for a variety of mechanisms, it's the Australian Greens and the Victorian Greens. I'm not sure about the other states, but I'm sure they've also got public housing policies, because everybody, is talking about, the only solution to the housing crisis is more private investment. Now, I'm going to go through this again because it's so simple, even somebody with a limited IQ like me can understand this. And it's very simple. Housing security, I should say, housing security is the most important aspect of living in this country today. If your housing security, whether it's you own a home or whether you own public housing where your rent is 25% of your income and you have housing security in that facility, is essential to a reasonable life. If you're in public housing, you own your own home, what that means is that in old age, it's not your superannuation, because your superannuation is basically you paying for your old age. Let's not forget that. It's about you paying for your old age. It's the fact that you own that home or you're in a secure public housing that makes all the difference to the type of life you can lead. And if you're a young parent or a single parent with children, it's essential that those children don't move year in, year out because of the type of rental situation we have in this country where you don't have long-term leases, where you can be evicted basically because, they want the place back. That means your children can't form those bonds of going to the same school and having the same friends. They can't be part of the same community, be part of the same sporting clubs, and that has an impact on the future of a child. So having access to housing is essential. And the whole Australian dream, the quarter-acre block, which is now more than a dream, it's a myth, was dependent on housing security. In the 60s, a single wage earner working for 7 years could actually buy a home. Today, we have intergenerational mortgages. When you do your bloody will, you say, well, to Ali and John and Peter and Samantha, I'll leave my mortgage. I'm not even joking. That's the way it is. And when you've got people paying 40 to 50%, 60% in some cases of their income, and I'm not talking about people on social security benefits, I'm talking about people in the workforce, as far as rent is concerned, you begin to understand the huge impact it has. So I'm going to go through this step by step. Now, public housing, everybody's business, has said consistently The way to finance public housing is by using stamp duty revenue on houses. In Victoria, stamp duty revenue on houses between $7 to $8 billion a year. You could build 100,000 public houses. You could house 1 million people within a decade if you use that money, which is levied on housing by the state governments, to provide public housing. But we don't do that. We privatise public housing. So what does a strong public housing sector mean? It means there is competition in the marketplace. Obviously, we live in a private investment for private profit society. Currently, with the privatisation of public housing and the growth of community and social housing, which is privately owned, what we are seeing is a total lack of competition in the marketplace. The greater the number of public housing and public units, which are owned by the government and managed by the government, the less need for private housing. The less need for private housing means fewer people need to rent. If fewer people need to rent, what that means is that rents decrease. If rents decrease, what that means is that a lot of investors, in inverted commas, who are relying on capital gain, and capital gain has slowed down remarkably over the last decade, who rely on, well, in some areas I should say, who rely on capital gain will get out of the marketplace. That means there are more privately owned dwellings at the lower end of the market that people can actually access at a lower price. And most importantly of all, what people forget is that the less money you pay for rent, or the less percentage of your income you pay for rent or a mortgage, the greater amount of disposable income you have. So it's a boost to the economy. Now, fancy an anarchist talking about public housing in this way, because you need competition. If you live in a capitalist society and there's no competition, all we see is the growth of corporations, what I call the bananisation of the economy, where one particular firm takes over a particular field of the economic activity, then prices naturally increase because there's no competition. That's why we have an Australian Competition and Consumer Commission to ensure there's competition. But they can't ensure there's competition because there's no legislation which they can use to enforce competition. We've just seen the ANZ Bank take over Suncorp, which is a huge regional bank, especially in Queensland. All that's going to do is decrease competition in the financial sector. So public housing is everybody's business. And if you are around on the 8th of March, which is this Thursday, come and join us on the steps of the Victorian Parliament House. Let's have a listen to what Samantha Ratham has to say, the Leader of the Greens of the Victorian Parliament, and let's see how far they've got in their push to change the trajectory of the public housing debate in this country. Because to rely on the private sector to resolve the housing crisis is ludicrous. It makes no sense at all. It is to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. My name is Joseph Toscano. I'm hosting today's program. Oops, it's the 6th today. I've stuffed it up again. It is the 6th of March. Let's get that right, boys and girls. It's the 6th of March. Maybe I'm trying to race towards extinction. It's the 6th of March today. It's not the 7th, it's not the 8th. So hopefully I haven't given you the wrong... Well, I have given you the wrong information. But if you wish, today's the 6th, tomorrow's the 7th. So if you wish to join the Public Housing Everybody's Business Visual Rally on the steps of the Victorian Parliament House, it's Thursday the 7th of March. Get it right, Joe. Get it right. Monday was the 4th, Tuesday's the 5th, Wednesday's the 6th, Thursday's the 7th. God, I'm a genius. All right, let's move on. They profit, you pay. They profit, you pay. Now, it's fascinating, isn't it? We live in a competitive society, we're told, and a private investment for private profit society. And I've just noticed that the canary, the economic canary, is beginning to teeter on its perch. Remember the good old days when they used to use children in mines and they had a canary which you took down with you, just, if the canary died, you knew the air wasn't up to scratch and you'd scramble your way up back to the surface. Well, there's such a thing as an economic canary. It's not a real canary, but it's about looking at what's happening in the economy. Now, I've noticed, a number of other commentators have noticed, not that I describe myself as a commentator, they've noticed that the number of small business bankruptcies are increasing all over the country. Now, small and micro business are the economic canaries which actually tell us as a community which way the economy is going. Because the profit margin that most small businesses have is minuscule. The fact is that 90% of small businesses in Australia, although they employ 5 million people, which is almost half of the workforce, fail within 5 years of being set up or closed down. The thing about small business is banks don't lend money to small business unless you're willing to give your house as collateral. And that means if your business fails, most likely you'll lose your home. It's that simple, because they don't give a shit at the end of the day as long as they get their money. They may have all their pleasant advertising about, come to us if you have a financial problem and we'll sort it out for you. Yeah, they'll put you on the keep an eye on this bastard because, they may not be able to pay their bills and we may lose a few dollars. But the fact is that over the last 2 to 3 years, what we've seen, and the stock market highlights this because it's now reached record levels. Yeah, record levels. What we've seen is the profits of major economic players have soared. Although the CEOs of most of these corporations are bitching about the fact that workers are getting a 3 to 4% average wage increase, which is about half the rate of inflation, was half the rate of inflation, while CEO salaries have almost doubled in the last 5 to 6 years. The fact that we're seeing rent stress, mortgage stress, increased homelessness, and something I never would like to say is food insecurity in this country. That's right, people don't have enough food, or if they do, it's all the wrong type, which gives them a bit of a headache and a lot of major health issues. But see, their profits has escalated, and this highlights the fact that the world stock markets have never been at a higher level. So there's inflation, which was caused by a variety of things which you weren't responsible for. It's a little bit like Gazans, the situations they find themselves in. They weren't responsible for the Holocaust, but now they're paying the price. All right? It's the same with you, most listeners to this program. You're not responsible for inflation, but you're asked to pay the price through increased interest rates. All right? You're asked to pay the price by increased food prices. You're asked to pay the price by increased government charges. And the list goes on and on. Increased medical costs, increased health costs, increased dental costs. All these necessities. All gone up. At the same time, while people face housing insecurity and, food insecurity, an increasing percentage of the Australian population, which is totally ridiculous in a country as rich as this, that we have these we have this situation, company profits increase. They increase to such a degree that the world stock markets are now reaching record levels. Just extraordinary. I mean, that's the beauty of being a private investment for private profit world. That is the beauty. Look, today I did something I don't normally do. Well, I do occasionally. Looking for a new house, 20 million in Mossman, 22 million in Toorak, if you got the money. No, I bought I actually did buy. I did spend $5. Maybe I should have done something else. A copy of the Financial Review, which I kind of looked at. And it's fascinating. Fascinating how it's all about privatising public assets. It's all about making a profit, irrespective of the human, social, environmental and community costs to the individual. It was all about CEO salaries. I mean, you need a salary of $20 to $30 or $40 million a year to afford that beautiful home in Toorak for $22 million. But it would be a pity if we got all these homeless people started camping outside your front yard. Although you'd have private security to ensure they didn't get through the brick wall. But that's the reality. That's the reality. You pay, they profit. A little bit like COVID. Remember? Who got all those billions of dollars which they didn't have to give back because they didn't need them? The major corporations. And it's the same now. And what do our political leaders do? Well, they jump up and down and make all the right noises, and like Peter Dutton, they fly off to see Gina for her 70th birthday party while deserting the electors in Dunkley. That's the situation we find ourselves in. Now, I finally sorted it out. Monday was the 4th, Tuesday was the 5th, Wednesday, which is today, is the 6th, tomorrow is the 7th, which is Thursday. So if you are in Melbourne, come along to the Public Housing Everybody's Vigil on the steps of the Victorian Parliament House at midday. Samantha Ratham, the leader of the Victorian Greens, the party of the Victorian Greens, will be giving a report to us and anybody else at the rally regarding what's happening in the Victorian Parliament, regarding the continuing public housing struggle. You can send me messages on 0439 395 489. You can even write to me at Post Office Box 20, Parkville 3052. Join Public Interest Before Corporate Interest on PIBCI, PIBCI.net. YouTube channels, Public Interest Before Corporate Interest, josephtoscano.com. Facebook pages, Toscano for the Public. Defend and extend public housing. Public housing, everybody's business. I could go on ad nauseum. Has Gina said to all of us, she likes people to look at her in the eye. And the same here. Come and join some of our activities. Forget about the Zoom. Forget about the click activism. Get out there, get involved, see people face to face. That's the only way for real change. That's why the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, flew from Canberra to Melbourne, Melbourne to Perth to attend Gina's birthday party, then Perth back to Melbourne to continue campaigning the Dunkley by-election, because he knew where real power lies. And the fact is, you need to look them straight in the eye. So, it's up to you what you do, obviously. I can't tell you what to do. I can make some suggestions. But whether you want to be an ostrich or a rabbit or a tiger is really up to you. Thank you once again for listening to the Anarchist World this week on your local community radio station, courtesy of the Community Radio Network. Now, I've been told that we've got a few more minutes. That's really nice to know. No, 20 seconds or 10 seconds. Who knows? We're about to be blasted off. The sacred cows have walked out. They're sick and tired of me getting the wrong date. It's the 6th of March today, Wednesday. Listen in next week.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death Earth's construction.
An analysis you'll never hear anywhere else. Anarchist World this week. Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. 10 a.m. every Wednesday. Listen to the Anarchist World this week for an up-to-date analysis of local, national and international events.
Poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.
Become a 3CR subscriber today. Go to 3cr.org.au/subscribe or call the station on 03 9419 8377. Be a part of your community radio station.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.